Judgment as a matter of law and renewed judgment as a matter of law. Just the rules. Here's our rule script. A court will grant a motion for judgment as a matter of law if it finds that no reasonable jury would have a sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the opposite side. The court may not determine the credibility of witnesses or weigh evidence. Okay, that first part you know very well. The legal standard is no reasonable jury would have a sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the opposite side. But you must remember that the judge may not determine the credibility of the witnesses or weigh the evidence, because those are the province of the jury. Okay, when can you move for JMOL? After one side has been fully heard on an issue. Sometimes it's one side, sometimes it's both sides. But the legal standard is after one side has been fully heard on an issue at any time before the case is submitted to the jury. And of course, you must move for JMOL to preserve the issue and renew it. Okay, there's one however. This has come up on the MBE. Someone's moving for JMOL, but the other side didn't introduce any evidence. Can they move for JMOL? No. If a party doesn't introduce any evidence regarding a jury issue at trial, then that issue is one for the jury to decide, not for the court in response to a JMOL motion. Okay, so what the court cannot do what? That's right, determine the credibility of the witnesses or weigh the evidence. That is for the jury to decide. And what happens if somebody moves for JMOL, but the other side hasn't presented any evidence? The court cannot rule on a JMOL motion. Remember, it's after one side has been fully heard on the issue. Okay, so our deadline for JMOL is, that's right, before the case goes to the jury. How about for renewed JMOL, RJMOL? The legal standard is the same. 28 days after the judgment, up to 28 days after the judgment, the party who moved for JMOL may renew that motion, stating that no reasonable jury would have a sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the opposite side. As an alternative, they usually move for a new trial. Okay, why would the judge consider a motion for a new trial? This is an MBE question. What happens? Can the judge consider the motion for the new trial? Yes. Why? Because a new trial is not a final judgment on the merits, whereas JMOL is a final judgment on the merits. So when you get a question that says, can the judge consider the motion for the new trial, or the judge will consider a motion for the new trial? Yes, they will. When they're looking at renewed judgment as a matter of law and as an alternative, the motion for a new trial, the judge may consider the motion for a new trial, and it is more liberally granted. Why? Because it is not a final judgment. Okay, speaking of motion for a new trial, we'll get into that in a minute. But a motion for the new trial, there's some serious error during the trial, or the verdict is, you know it, against the manifest weight of the evidence. So what does this mean? Under JMOL, the judge cannot weigh evidence, cannot determine credibility of witnesses, never. Those are the don'ts. The judge may not weigh evidence. The judge may not determine the credibility of witnesses. However, now we get to RJMOL. The judge will either grant it, in which case that operates as that's right, final judgment on the merits. And if the judge grants a motion for the new trial, it has to be a serious error during the trial. The verdict is against the manifest weight of the evidence is our legal standard. So the judge may consider the evidence. The judge may consider the evidence, but remember, a new trial is not granted unless there is a serious miscarriage of justice. We'll get back to that in a minute. But for now, here's our rule script. A court will grant a motion for judgment as a matter of law if it finds that no reasonable jury would have a sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the opposing side. And in granting this, the court may not determine the credibility of witnesses or weigh evidence. A party may move for JMOL after one side, preferably both sides, have been fully heard on an issue, and at any time before the case is submitted to the jury. If a party produces no evidence, then you can't get JMOL. That's a jury issue. RJMOL, our rule script. A party may move for renewed judgment as a matter of law if they previously moved for judgment as a matter of law and were denied. Deadline, 28 days after the judgment. The legal standard is the same. No reasonable jury would have a sufficient evidentiary basis to find for the opposite side. As an alternative, a party will usually move for a new trial and the judge will consider it. Why? Because renewed JMOL would be a final judgment. And a new trial is not a final judgment. Okay, one little itty bitty wrinkle. Is the 28-day rule a hard rule? Generally, yes. The judge can give more time. A state or local rule could give more time, but in general, it's 28 days after the judgment. Okay, that's it.